Welcome. This is James Corbett of the Corbett Report with your eye-opener report for BoilingFrogsPost.com. Few in the general public have heard much, if anything at all, about the relatively obscure corner of academia known as bioethics. First emerging as an academic discipline in the late 1960s, bioethics concerns itself with the ethical questions raised by advancing knowledge and technological sophistication in biology, medicine, and the life sciences. When the discussions of the bioethics community eventually filter down to the level of popular discourse, they often seem like bizarre, science fiction-like scenarios about improbable possibilities.
So imagine that a drunk driver hits you and it crushes your leg, and you're completely traumatized by the event. And they take you to the hospital, and just before your operation, they give you a pill to erase your memory of this traumatic event.
My colleagues and I asked 30 volunteers to make judgments in a series of moral dilemmas like the one I described to you. We wanted to see whether we could change people's judgments of right and wrong by manipulating a particular brain chemical called serotonin.
Imagine what's going to happen when we have a memory pill. First of all, you don't have to raise your hand, but let's be honest, who here's going to take it? Okay? You know?
As unlikely or ivory tower-ish as these scenarios might appear at first blush, there could be no dispute that the technologies for implementing these ideas are increasingly within our grasp. What many fail to appreciate, however, are the dangers inherent in entrusting some of the most important discussions about the life, death, and health of humanity in the hands of a priestly academic class toiling in relative obscurity to produce position papers for government advisory boards. As more and more increasingly outrageous headlines begin to gain notoriety among the general public, Newsweek making the case for killing Granny, for example, or the recent widespread coverage of an article in the Journal of Medical Ethics promoting infanticide, many are only beginning to realize what the authors of the after-birth abortion paper admitted in such a blasé fashion in the open letter they used to defend their proposal. These debates have been going on in the bioethics community for 40 years. They are only now arriving as a type of fait accompli to be digested by the public.
Morning. First, the U.S. has been adding fluoride to its public water supply for decades, and of course to prevent tooth decay. Well, now researchers from Japan are suggesting that we add lithium. So why is that?
Well, they're actually not suggesting it, but they're certainly looking into it. Lithium is a medication that in prescription doses treats mood disorders in people with bipolar disorder or manic depressive illness. And what these researchers found in Japan is that lithium is present in trace amounts in the normal water supply in some communities. And in those communities, they have a lower suicide rate. And so they're really investigating whether trace amounts of lithium can just change the mood in a community enough to really, in a positive way, without having the bad effects of lithium, to really affect the mood and decrease the suicide rate. Very interesting concept.
Hey, Remy, let's tackle the former question first. We already have fluoride in tap water for our teeth. Why not add some lithium for our mind? It can't hurt.
Well, apparently it really can. It can only help. I mean, there are days that I'd like a little pick-me-up, put a smile on my face. By the way, your face is not getting fatter.
Oh, why, thank you.
Just so we're clear. You know,
You'll be back. So right now what you see is it's squeezing higher education. You're raising tuitions at the University of California as rapidly as they can. And so the access that used to be available to the middle class or whatever is just rapidly going away. That's a trade-off society is making because of very, very high medical costs and a lack of willingness to say, you know, is spending $1 million on that last 3 months of life for that patient, would it be better not to lay off those 10 teachers and to make that trade-off in medical costs? But that's called the death panel. And you're not supposed to have that discussion.
Although Gates's desire for death panels seem frighteningly out of tune with the majority of Americans, these thoughts are very much in the mainstream of bioethics. As historian and researcher Anton Chaikin has documented in great detail, the death panel discussions in bioethics relate directly to a very disturbing history, one that ties people like Dr. Ezekiel Emanuel, brother of former White House Chief of Staff and current mayor of Chicago, Rahm Emanuel, to the pseudoscience of eugenics. In 2009, Chaikin presented some of his research on the history of the bioethics euthanasia idea, to a meeting of a federal council that was set up to propose funding priorities that would withdraw funding for healthcare procedures from the elderly.
Dr. Ezekiel Emanuel and other avowed cost cutters on this panel also lead a propaganda movement for euthanasia headquartered at the Hastings Center, of which Dr. Emanuel is a fellow. They shape public opinion and the medical profession to accept a death culture such as the Washington state law passed in November to let physicians help kill patients whose medical care is now rapidly being withdrawn in the universal health disaster. Dr. Emanuel's movement for bioethics and euthanasia and this council's purpose directly continue the eugenics movement that organized Hitler's killing of patients and then other costly and supposedly unworthy people. Dr. Emanuel wrote last October 12th that a crisis, war, and financial collapse would get the frightened public to accept the program. Hitler told Dr. Brandt in 1935 that the euthanasia program would have to wait until the war began to get the public to go along. Dr. Emanuel wrote last year that the Hippocratic Oath should be junked. Doctors should no longer just serve the needs of the patient. Hoche and Binding, the German eugenicists, exactly said the same thing to start the killing. You on the council are drawing up the procedures list to be used to deny care, which will kill millions if it goes ahead in the present world crash.
Chaikin's assertions are backed by a litany of data, showing that in fact both the Nazi eugenics movement and the modern bioethics discipline share a common root: the now discredited 19th century pseudoscience known as eugenics. First coined by Francis Galton, eugenics refers to the theory of hereditable intelligence and morality, which posited that wealthy, successful, and intelligent individuals were made so by virtue of their good breeding, and that the wicked and vice-ridden lower classes would always remain so because they continued to breed with other poor people. Naturally, this idea appealed to a large section of the scientific community in late Victorian England, providing as it did a justification for their own privilege and wealth. Eugenics soon became a superstar science, propounded by celebrities, politicians, and social campaigners with a vested interest in finding a scientific justification for racial and class discrimination. After the Nazis tarnished the name of eugenics in the eyes of the public, the U.S. Eugenics Society began a process known as crypto-eugenics, changing the name and outward function of the eugenics movement while maintaining its core ideas and goals. As American Eugenics Society co-founder Frederick Osborne wrote, "Eugenic goals are most likely to be attained under a name other than eugenics." Thus, Eugenics Quarterly, a journal co-founded by Osborne for publishing eugenics research, changed its name in 1970 to Social Biology. The American Eugenics Society was renamed the Society for the Study of Social Biology. Osborne himself took the reins of the Population Council, which had been created by John D. Rockefeller III to focus on the threat of the expansion of non-white populations. The Eugenics Society merely moved its offices into the Population Council headquarters, and the two groups merged together. In 1968, the Population Council and the Rockefeller family provided funds for Daniel Callahan to found the Hastings Center, one of the earliest and most influential of the academic bioethics research institutes, boasting many of the leading bioethicists as fellows, including Ezekiel Emanuel and Peter Singer. The link is made even more transparent by the fact that the founding director of the Hastings Center, Theodore Dobzhansky, was a chairman of the American Eugenics Society, while Hastings director Callahan became a director of the society. Earlier today, I had the chance to talk to Jon Rappoport, an author, researcher, and investigative reporter at NoMoreFakeNews.com, about the American-based, Rockefeller-supported crypto-eugenics pedigree of the bioethics discipline, and what this means for those attempting to come to an understanding of the profession.
I mean, you're right in tracing this history, and this is the other thread of the whole argument here about bioethics and who lives and who dies. That American movement was eventually exported to Nazi Germany. It started really here. It then moved to Nazi Germany, and of course, they ratcheted up, you know, thousands of degrees, literally. It is this notion that the fittest should survive. And so it falls to those who have superior knowledge to decide who are the fittest, because that's what we want in the future. I mean, there's much science fiction that backs this kind of thing up. You read H.G. Wells' novel, for example, The Shape of Things to Come. There are others. There's a whole British tradition behind this idea of, in the future, we're going to have a superior kind of human. Well, how do we do this? We have to identify who is inferior and eliminate them, because otherwise they're going to contaminate the gene pool. And so decisions will be made. And we get now, up until the present, many different kinds of arguments now coming out of academia. For example, Lee Silver at Princeton University. He argues, let the market decide. In the future, this is what's going to happen. Those who can afford it are going to buy synthetic genes to be inserted into their children, pre or post birth, and those are going to be the most talented, intelligent, able, strong individuals. And this upper crust of society is going to live apart. The rest of society is going to be, quote, the animals, I mean, the lower caste, and they will never interbreed. They will live separately. And so what Silver is saying, it's coming. There's nothing that can stop it. This is how it's going to play out. And he's taking a, quote, libertarian position on it. The market will determine how this comes down. Now you have other such, quote, thinkers who are arguing as advocates for one side of this or the other. But it's speckled with many different versions now of eugenics or crypto-eugenics, where different people are weighing in. And what's happening as a result of it, and I follow this in my reporting, I can see now that society is softening around the edges vis-a-vis this notion. It's not just, oh my God, that's horrific. People are going, well, maybe that's a good idea. Unbelievable, but it's happening.
Different societies throughout the centuries have answered the question of who gets to live and who gets to die in different ways. Throughout much of human history, that question was resolved at a community level, based on practices, traditions, and cultural norms that had developed among specific people for specific historical reasons. Never before has that decision been made in such a centralized fashion as it is in 21st century society, with its increasingly sophisticated medical technologies administered by accredited professionals in clinical settings that must conform to the edicts of boards, organizations, and governmental regulations. The fear amongst a great majority of the American public, a fear that is immediately and roundly mocked by a significant portion of the establishment lapdog media, is that these decisions have led, and will continue to lead, to a society that places a diminished value on the sanctity of life itself. Given the proposals for infanticide, death panels, and other serious discussions that have been treated as private, members-only discussions amongst the hallowed ranks of bioethics academia, it would be impossible to say that this fear is unfounded. And given the demonstrable ties between the field of bioethics and the discredited eugenics movement, it does not seem unreasonable at all to question how and why the United States, the most materially wealthy country in the history of civilization, would be so eager to begin weighing the costs of keeping Granny alive against the costs of employing teachers. In this case, it seems, as in many other cases, the only people who are interested in shutting down the discussions are the ones who know they would lose them were they to be opened up for public debate. This video is brought to you by the subscribers of BoilingFrogsPost.com. For more information on this and other topics, please go to BoilingFrogsPost.com. For more information and commentary from James Corbett, please go to CorbettReport.com.